Hello, it's Bishop Mark. Today is Luke chapter 5, verses 18 to 26. So Jesus is preaching in Galilee, and we found out yesterday that the Pharisees and the scribes were watching him. And so there are great crowds around Jesus. So let's see what happens, starting with verse 18. Here it is. And some men brought on a stretcher a man who was paralyzed. They were trying to bring him in and set him in his presence. Do you know what paralyzed is? Paralyzed is someone who maybe from the waist down cannot move their legs. They can't run around and walk like you. So today they'd be in a wheelchair. Or maybe this man was paralyzed in his whole body, so he can't move his arms or his legs. It's such a terrible thing. And so what did they do? They tried to bring him to Jesus, but there's a crowd around him. Okay, let's continue. But finding not a way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on the stretcher through the tiles into the middle in front of Jesus. This is one of the most known stories in the Bible. I remember when I was a kid and I had a book of Bible stories, and I remember this story very well. So there's this Jesus inside a house. There's a crowd around the house, and these people have this man on a stretcher. And they're so determined to get this man in front of Jesus that they go up on the roof of the house. And the roof had these sections, these tiles on it, they call them. They're like maybe the squares or whatever. And they took up the tiles and they lowered the stretcher right into Jesus. Imagine the scene inside when Jesus was preaching away and all of a sudden the roof opens up and there's people bringing a stretcher. Cardinal Sean, where I am, my bishop, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, he likes to talk about not the man on the stretcher or Jesus, but the men that helped him, that wanted their friend to get to Jesus so much that they went to that great extent. Okay, so they lowered him. So now Jesus is inside, there's people around, the Pharisees and the scribes are watching, and down comes the stretcher. Let's see what happens. When he saw their faith, he said, "As for you, your sins are forgiven." What a strange story. So, let's start it again. Jesus is talking. The man comes down from the sky through the roof. And Jesus says to the man on the stretcher, not, okay, I'll heal you. But he tells the man on the stretcher, your sins are forgiven. Now, remember when Jesus healed the man with leprosy? And he healed him on the outside, but he sent him to the priests for the healing on the inside? Do you remember that? Not too far ago? Well, look what Jesus is doing here. He's not healing the outside, at least yet. He's healing the inside. He's telling this man that his sins are forgiven. The opposite of what he did to the leper. The leper, he healed the outside, sent to the priest to make sure he was clean on the inside. Here, he's doing the opposite. It's very important. It's something new and something astonishing. And we just said the scribes and the Pharisees and the priests are watching him. And now he does what a priest could only do, or really what God can only do. And that is he heals the man's sins. It was a very startling move. They were fascinated by this and astounded. Who would do this? Who would forgive someone's sins? Especially now, you also have to remember that when someone was sick like that, they also thought it reflected on if they were sinful or not. And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. Okay, this is taking a twist in two different ways. Jesus is healing the outside, and he's talking about forgiving of sins, the inside, and he's talking about forgiving sins, which is something God does. So, what happens? Then the scribes and the Pharisees began to ask themselves, who is this who speaks blasphemies? Blasphemies. What a word. Blasphemies. A blasphemy is speaking something, doing something that only God can do. So, pretending you're God is how they saw him. And they said, he is doing a blasphemy. A terrible thing is to pretend you're God. Now, they don't know that Jesus is God, is the Messiah, right? So they're very offended by what Jesus said, your sins are forgiven. And they called it a blasphemy. Okay. Who but God alone can forgive sins? So I guess I just said that. I anticipated. So who but God alone can do this? Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them in reply, what are you thinking in your hearts? Which is easier? To say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise and walk? So, this is Jesus in front of many people, being watched by the scribes and the Pharisees, and he is saying what we had said before about more important is to clean the inside than the outside. More important is the forgiving of sins than the healing of the body. And Jesus says to them, which is easier? In other words, he's done the harder thing already, which is to forgive the man's sins, but they don't believe he did. They believe he's doing the blasphemy thing. Oh, it's so interesting. Okay. But, says Jesus, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the man who was paralyzed, I say to you, rise, pick up your stretcher, and go home. So, Jesus then heals the man. Because it says here, he stood up immediately before them, picked up what he had been lying on, and went home glorifying God. So now Jesus has reached a big new step in what he is saying, in his revealing of himself as the Messiah. Now he forgives the man's sins, and then to prove that he could do that, he heals the man. He tells the man to pick up his mat, and the man did. The man who was paralyzed stood up. Now, we've seen Jesus heal before, but he doesn't like to heal just for the healing. In other words, there's lots of people who could use healing. He can't heal them all because he's in his human form, right? So he can't get to all the people in the world. So healing is just to demonstrate God's power. And so he uses healing now to demonstrate that he did forgive the man's sins. Okay. He stood up immediately. Okay. Then astonishment seized them all, and they glorified God. And struck with awe, they said, we have seen incredible things today. Now notice how the Pharisees and the scribes are watching him, but there's lots and lots of other people there. And Jesus knows this. They know they'll be astonished. They'll glorify God. And the Pharisees and the scribes can't do anything because all the people are amazed by Jesus' teaching, by his healing, by his forgiving the man's sins. And so he is a hero to all these people in the house, except for the scribes and the Pharisees. And this made them angry. To us, it shows Jesus' glory. He's the Messiah. He's the Son of Man. He can forgive your sins. You know, he can heal your body too, but he can forgive your sins, is how we see it. But that's not how the Pharisees and the scribes saw it, did they? Okay, we'll go on next time. Peace to you.